Chapter 4. In order to realize the true significance of the contribution Iqbal made to the politics of the subcontinent, one has to understand the historical background in which he worked. This means a historical survey of the 12 centuries of Muslim contact with the subcontinent. This contact started with Muslim conquest of Sind in 712 by that intrepid 16-year-old Arab general Muhammad bin Qasim. This invasion was followed by attacks from the north when Subaktigin of Ghazni came into conflict with his neighbor Jaipal. His son Mahmud invaded the subcontinent 17 times between 999 and 1025, and was eventually successful in annexing the Punjab to his empire. In course of time, the house of Ghazni was supplanted by the dynasty of Ghor, and Shahabuddin Ghori, a scion of the dynasty, conquered the kingdom of Delhi in 1292. From 1292 to 1526-5, Turkish or Afghan dynasties ruled at Delhi. The Mughals succeeded the Turco-Afghans in 1526 when Babar defeated Ibrahim Lodi on the plains of Panipat. The Mughals ruled on the subcontinent from 1526 to 1857 with one break, but the disintegration of the great empire had set in 1707, the year in which Aurangzeb, the last great Mughal emperor, died. Towards the year 1748, the once mighty Mughal empire was virtually reduced to a mere strip of land round Delhi. This disintegration continued during the next 100 years till 1858, the year in which the last emperor of the family, Emperor Bahadur Shah, was deported to Rangoon by the British. During the disintegration which set in after Aurangzeb's death, there were attempts at Hindu resurgence through the Marathas and the Jats. As the kaleidoscopic changes in the politics of the subcontinent progressed, the one event which characterized the whole process was the progress of the British East India Company. Like other European nations, the British also came to the subcontinent as traders. The East India Company was founded on the 31st of December 1600. This company succeeded in extending the field of its commercial operations, and during Shah Jahan's reign, they obtained from him the privilege of trading in Bengal. About this time there appeared on the scene a remarkable British soldier who, by intrigues and military power, succeeded in establishing British supremacy in the Bengal province of the subcontinent. Similarly, the defeat of the French in 3 Carnatic wars established British supremacy in the south. While the British were busy consolidating their power in Bengal and southern India, an event of extraordinary importance happened in northern India. The Marathas, whose power was gaining strength and who can well be regarded as a symbol of Hindu resurgence, were routed by Ahmad Shah Abdali in the Battle of Panipat in 1761. This was a godsend for the British. Here a reference must be made to the 2 Muslim states in southern India, Hyderabad and Mysore. As a result of the French defeat in the Carnatic Wars, the Nizam of Hyderabad became a vassal of the British. In Mysore, Tipu Sultan put up a spirited fight against the British and had inflicted on them a crushing defeat at Mangalore, 1783. In the Fourth Mysore War, 1799, Tipu Sultan was killed, his sons were deprived of the right of succession, and a Hindu ruler was put on the throne of Mysore. Thus, the last vestige of Muslim power disappeared from southern India. Towards the end of the first half of the 19th century, 2 events of great importance for the Muslims occurred. In 1843, Sind, the oldest possession of the Muslims on the subcontinent, was conquered by Sir Charles Napier. On 7th February 1856, Oudh was finally annexed by the British. Thus it will be seen that by 1857 most of the country had passed under the British rule, except for those Indian states which had accepted a position of vassalage. For the Muslims, these were the days of great humiliation and frustration. From a position of supremacy, they were reduced to one of extreme political and economic degradation. Naturally, There were feelings of antagonism and opposition against the ascendancy of the British as a military and political power, both amongst the Muslims and the Hindus. And the result was an uprising which started in Meerut on the 10th of May, 1857. During the first 4 months, the British authorities, taken by surprise, were paralysed and were unable to act. The timely arrival of the British troops in Calcutta, who were actually on their way to China, saved the East India Co. The uprising was suppressed, and the British Crown took over the government of India in 1858, and the East India Company vanished from the stage of Indian history. Although even before the uprising the Muslims had suffered heavily at the hands of the British, after the suppression of the uprising began a period of systematic persecution and political annihilation. There were mass hangings of the Muslims all over the country. Their properties were confiscated, their houses dug up in search for loot, and their belongings and houses were sold almost for nothing to the Hindus. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has said, "After 1857, heavy hand of the British fell more on the Muslims than on the Hindus." This is understating truth. A Hindu historian has remarked, "The British government, till 1857, was mostly pro-Hindu, looking upon the Muslims as their implacable enemies." One Governor-General even boasted that he had revenged the sack of Somnath by his destruction of Ghazni, and by his removing the gate of the historic temple. Although it is a fact that the Muslims and the Hindus lived as quite different people and never mixed, never intermarried or interdined, there was no open hostility between the two people. This was definitely encouraged by the British imperialists in furtherance of their own nefarious objects. The Hindus could also see that it was better for them to realign their policy in accordance with the wishes of the new masters. The advantages to be gained thereby far outweighed the advantages that could possibly be gained as a result of good relations with the Muslims. Thus, the Muslims had not only to face persecution at the hands of the British, but also fierce political, economic, and at times physical struggles with the Hindus. As Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has remarked, by the end of the mutiny, the Musalmans high and low were brought down by these series of events to the lowest depths of broken pride, black despair, and general penury. Without prestige, without education, and without resources, the Muslims were left to the Hindus. The British pledged to neutrality were indifferent to the result of the struggle between the communities. The result was that the Musalmans completely suffered in the struggle. Although the British professed neutrality, they were really more interested in the annihilation of the Muslims than even the Hindus. The Muslims were faced with a desperate and gloomy situation. At this critical time in their history, there appeared a remarkable man, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, 1817 to 1898, who can be regarded as the founder of the Muslim integration in the subcontinent. Sir Syed Ahmad fought for his people on every front, and it is impossible to describe his services to his people in a brief sketch. But perhaps his greatest service was that he gave his people a sense of separate existence and fought against the introduction in the subcontinent democracy of the Western type. After retirement, he was nominated a member of the Governor-General's Council. In a speech in the Council in 1883, he said, "The system of representation by election means the representation of the views and the interests of the majority of the population. But, my lord, in a country like India, where caste distinctions still flourish, where there is no fusion of the various races, where religious differences are still violent, where education in the modern sense has not made an equal or proportionate progress among all sections of the population, I am convinced that the introduction of the principle of election, pure and simple, for representation of various interests in the local boards and district councils would be attended with evils of greater significance than purely economic considerations. The larger community would totally override the interests of the smaller community." As regards suppression of the Muslims by the government, a British writer says, There is no use shutting our ears to the fact that the Indian Mohammedans arraign us on a list of charges as serious as have ever been brought against a government. In a word, the Indian Mussulmans arraign against the British government for its want of sympathy, for its want of magnanimity, for the malversion of their funds, for the great public wrongs spread over a period of 100 years. In 1909 was passed the Indian Councils Act of 1909, generally known as Morley-Minto reforms. The importance of the Morley-Minto reforms, from the Muslim point of view, was that they conceded the Muslim demand for separate electorates. It is impossible for those living in homogeneous societies or in those multi-religious societies where religion plays no important part in man's life to understand the principle of separate electorates. But in a country where religion is understood to denote different nationalities, the only way to grant proper representation to different groups is to admit the principle of separate electorate. Any other course would tantamount to annihilation of the minorities. English politicians, on the whole, failed to understand this. Reasonable Hindu leaders admitted the inevitability of the system. The second installment of reforms was granted to India in 1919. These were known as the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. The system of separate electorates was not viewed with favour, but it was allowed to continue. We have already referred to the fact that the Muslims and the Hindus lived in the country as separate people with occasional exhibitions of open hostility. But after the First World War, certain circumstances brought the Hindus and the Muslims closer, mainly as a result of what is known as the Khilafat movement, a movement to ensure that Muslim holy places remained in Muslim possession and that Turkey was not dismembered. But in 1923, cracks appeared in the Hindu-Muslim unity. The causes which contributed immensely to increase in friction between the Hindus and the Muslims of the subcontinent was the organization of the Shuddhi and Sangathan movement by the Hindus. The aim of the former movement is to reduce the Muslim population by a process of reconversion, and of the latter to organize a private army to exterminate the remaining Muslim population. The result was that relations between the two nations became poisoned and a series of riots made them worse. We have described the historical background of the Muslims on the subcontinent with special reference to the political and economic difficulties which the Muslims had to face as a result of the antagonistic attitude of the ruling power and the aggressiveness of the Hindus. It is not possible to understand the true significance of Iqbal's politics without a full understanding of this background. It is true that Iqbal did not take any active part in the politics of the subcontinent for a long time. During this period, he was busy in creating political consciousness and a sense of integration amongst his people. Once this was done and he realized that time was ripe for him to take an active part in politics, he never hesitated for a moment. But even when he kept himself aloof from active politics, he continued to take interest in the politics of the subcontinent. While a student in England, he attended the meetings of the Muslim League held under the chairmanship of the Right Honourable Amir Ali. On return to the Punjab, he took an active interest in the affairs of the Punjab Muslim League, but from 1913 to 1923 he abstained from any active political work. The reasons can only be surmised. This was the time when Iqbal was busy developing his philosophy and writing his epoch-making poems Asrar-i-Khudi, Rumuz-i-Bekhudi, Khizr-i-Ra, and Tulu-i-Islam, etc. During this period, the Muslim political leaders were definitely thinking of rapprochement with the Hindu aggressive political ambitions garbed under the cloak of nationalism, which finally resulted in the Lucknow Pact. Iqbal was never tired of criticizing the Lucknow Pact, which had turned Muslim majority in the Punjab and Bengal into minorities, whatever may be the reasons for that, but it is a fact that Iqbal did not take any active part in politics during this period. It was in 1923 that Iqbal was persuaded by certain friends to stand for election to the Punjab Legislative Council, and he was quite willing to do so. But his supporters wanted him to stand from Lahore, a seat for which Mian Abdul Aziz was also a candidate. As Mian Abdul Aziz was an old friend, Iqbal decided not to contest the election. Finally, he stood for elections to the council in 1926 and was elected by an overwhelming majority. He remained a member of the Punjab Legislative Council from 1926 to 1929 and took great interest in the proceedings of the council. It was about this time that the British government decided to appoint a commission under Sir John Simon, later Lord Simon, to investigate methods of introducing constitutional reforms in Indo-Pakistan subcontinent. This was really as a result of agitation against the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms introduced in 1919. The announcement of the commission led to division of public opinion on the subcontinent as to whether there should be cooperation with the commission or not. This split also affected the Muslim League. The main body of the Muslim League, led by the Quaid-i-Azam, decided to boycott the commission. But an influential section of the Muslim leaders, led by Sir Muhammad Shafi, thought that boycotting the commission was against the interests of the Muslims. These leaders, led by Sir Muhammad Shafi, formed a separate Muslim League, which was known as Shafi League, and Iqbal was elected secretary of this league. The Council of the Shafi League, at its meetings held in Lahore and attended by Iqbal, decided the lines on which the memorandum to be submitted to the commission was to be prepared. The main point was insistence on provincial autonomy. But when the memo was actually prepared, Iqbal was out of Lahore and he saw the memo only on his return. He was very disappointed to see that recommendations referring to provincial autonomy were utterly disregarded by the committee which had prepared the memo. So Iqbal resigned from the Shafi League, but his resignation was never accepted, and instead the memorandum eventually submitted to the commission was modified in accordance with Iqbal's recommendations, and Iqbal was actually a member of the delegation which gave evidence before the Simon Commission on behalf of the Shaft League. Meanwhile, Iqbal continued to take an active interest in the proceedings of the Legislative Council. On 23 February 1928, he made an interesting speech on land revenue, during the course of which he remarked, "Let me tell the honourable representative for Simla that the first European author to refute this theory of state ownership of land was the Frenchman Perron in the year 1777. Later in 1830, Briggs made a very extensive inquiry as to the law and practice in India and relating to the theory of state ownership of land. He gave in his book an accurate description of the laws of Manu, if Muslim law, and the practice prevailing in the various parts of India, Bengal, Malwa, the Punjab, etc., and arrived at the conclusion that in no period in the history of India the state ever claimed proprietorship of land. On 10th March 1937, speaking on education, Iqbal said, "A disinterested foreign government in this country is a contradiction in terms. The foreign government in this country wants to keep people ignorant. A foreign government is a kind of Roman Catholic Church trying to suppress all agencies that tend to enlighten the country. Can anybody deny in this House or outside the House that mass education is absolutely essential in the interests of the people? Therefore, my submission is that so far as primary education is concerned, it is absolutely necessary in the interests of the province to adopt the principle of compulsion at once." On 1 January 1929, Iqbal attended the Muslim conference held in Delhi under the chairmanship of the Aga Khan. The conference passed a resolution insisting on separate electorates, separation of Sindh from Bombay, introduction of reforms in the North-West Frontier Province, NWFP, and Baluchistan, introduction of federal government in the country with residuary powers in the provinces, and reservation of 1/3 seats in the federal legislature for the Muslims. In 1930, Iqbal presided at the annual session of the Muslim League. In his presidential address said, "I would like to see the Punjab, northwest frontier province, Sindh and Baluchistan amalgamated into a single state, self-governing with the British Empire. The formation of a consolidated Northwest Indian Muslim state appears to be the final destiny of the Muslims, at least of Northwest India." The Simon Commission finished its work in the country in April 1929 and submitted its report to the British government in the middle of 1930. But even while the Commission was busy collecting evidence in the country, there was so much agitation against its composition and modus operandi. Then in October 1929, the Victory announced that the British government proposed to call a round-table conference in London to consider the question of future constitutional reforms in the subcontinent. The first round-table conference commenced its work towards the close of 1930 and finished on 19th January 1931. Iqbal did not attend this conference. The second round-table conference started work in September 1931 and finished on 1st December 1931. Iqbal attended this conference, which was also attended by Mr. Gandhi. At this conference, two committees were formed, the Minorities Committee and the Federal Structure Committee, but the members could arrive at no agreed solution of the communal problem. So the delegation wrote a letter to the British Prime Minister requesting him to give an award. The Prime Minister gave the award in August 1932. As soon as the award was announced, Iqbal issued a statement in the course of which he said, "I honestly believe that no community has a more genuine grievance against the decision than the Muslims. Indeed, I cannot explain to myself as how the British conscience has tolerated this injustice." In 1931, a conference of Muslim leaders was held in Bhopal, and Iqbal attended it also. The third round-table conference was held from 17th November 1932 to 24th December 1932. Iqbal attended this conference also. On 21st March 1932, Iqbal presided over the deliberations of the All India Muslim Conference held at Lahore. In his presidential address, he declared, "I suggest that the Indian Muslims should have only one political organization with provincial and districts boards all over the country. Call it whatever you like. What is essential is that its constitution must be such as to make it possible for any school of political thought to come into power and guide the community according to its own ideas and methods." As a matter of fact, it was mainly Iqbal who, about this time, brought the two branches of the Muslim League together and then persuaded the Muslim Conference to get amalgamated with the League. About this time, Iqbal also attended a number of meetings of the Council of the Muslim Conference held in Delhi and Simla. From 1931 to 1934, the Muslim League had suffered a great deal in influence and popularity, and Mr. Jinnah was so disappointed that he had gone and settled in England in 1941. He was persuaded to return to the subcontinent in 1934. On his return, he took up the work of revitalizing the League. In 1935, the Government of India Act was passed, so all political parties, including the Muslim League, got busy in connection with the preparation for the forthcoming elections. In its sessions held at Bombay, had 1936 the League authorized Mr. Jinnah to form a central parliamentary board. But Mr. Jinnah received no cooperation from any province, and no Muslim leaders were willing to help in revitalizing the League. The Muslims were at this time so badly disorganized that, as a writer has remarked, "But the midst of all this darkness there shone a flickering light in Lahore." This was Iqbal. In order to carry out the directions of the League, Mr. Jinnah went to Lahore in 1936 and stayed there for 4 days. During this stay, he met Sir Fazli Hussain, who had come back to the Punjab after finishing his term as a member of the Victory's Executive Council, and asked him to from the Punjab Parliamentary Board on behalf of the League. But this gentleman simply refused to cooperate and rudely asked the Quaid-i-Azam to leave the Punjab. In despair, the Quaid-i-Azam turned to Iqbal, who willingly undertook to organize the work for the Punjab Parliamentary Board. Iqbal called for a meeting of the Punjab League Council on 30th May 1936, which re-elected him as president of